I'm Clara Wynn, 31, the middle child in our small Seattle family. Last Sunday, we gathered around my parents' dining table. Same oak wood, same arguments hiding under polite smiles. Mom had made her usual roast salmon and lemon potatoes, but the air felt heavier than steam from the food. I took a breath, my hands damp under the table. I've been thinking about buying a small place, I said quietly. Something near the lake. Maybe by the end of the year? The room froze. And then, laughter. My dad leaned back, shaking his head. A house? Clara, you can barely afford your rent. Mom's fork clinked against her plate. Sweetheart, be realistic. You need stability before you start fantasizing about property. Across from me, my sister Mara smirked, swirling her wine. Mom, don't be mean, she said, but her tone dripped with amusement. She's just dreaming again, Dad chuckled. Dreaming doesn't pay mortgages, Mara. Their laughter filled the room, bouncing off the walls like it always did. That familiar blend of condescension and certainty that I'd never be more than the creative one, the one who never quite made it. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for them to see me differently. I just smiled, lips tight, heartbeat steady, holding a secret they couldn't imagine. Because while they were busy mocking my little design studio, I had been quietly building something real. 3 months earlier, I had signed my first major contract, an interior design project for a luxury property group downtown. A project that, if successful, would open doors my parents didn't even know existed. 2 weeks after that dinner, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from Mom, missed messages from Dad, even a text from Mara, which she'd never done before. Clara, we need to talk. It's urgent, I didn't reply. Instead, I sent 4 words back. Get off my property. They thought I was joking. They'd learn soon enough. For years, they'd called me a failure, laughed at my plans, compared me to everyone else. But that night, their laughter had ended something in me. And what happened next? Let's just say, they finally saw what I'd been building while they were too busy underestimating me. Hey, have you ever been dismissed by your own family? Stick around. You won't believe how this unfolded. When I was a kid, the Wynn family looked perfect from the outside. We lived in a 2-story house in the north end of Seattle. Brick walls covered in ivy, flower beds that Mom kept spotless, and wind chimes that never stopped singing. To the neighbors, we were the picture of warmth. My father, a successful architect. My mother, a perfectionist with a smile that could freeze you mid-sentence. And my sister Mara, the golden one. I used to think love meant applause. Whoever earned it the loudest got to keep it the longest. When Mara was in middle school, she won a state math competition. Dad hung her certificate right above the fireplace, framed in oak. When I brought home a sketch that won a small art contest, Mom smiled and said, "That's nice, honey," before pinning it to the fridge, underneath a grocery list. That was the pattern. Mara won medals. I got polite nods. I wasn't jealous at first, just confused. But as I got older, the gap widened. Mara got new clothes, for confidence. I got hand-me-downs for practicality. When she needed a new laptop for college, Dad wrote a check without blinking. When I asked for art supplies, Mom suggested I get a job, so I did. At 16, I started sketching logos and digital flyers for local cafes. I'd sit by my bedroom window for hours, designing while listening to the sound of laughter downstairs, dinner parties, birthdays, family friends admiring Mara's grades. I stopped waiting for invitations. In college, things didn't change. I chose design school instead of the accounting degree Dad suggested. He called it a phase. Mom said, "You'll regret not choosing something stable." Mara, meanwhile, got engaged at 25. A lawyer from a respected family. Their engagement photo was framed before they even picked a wedding date. I remember standing in the kitchen the night Dad offered to pay for Mara's wedding venue. "Of course we'll cover it," he said, tapping the calculator like it was a reflex. "You only get married once." Then he turned to me half laughing. Clara, when you find a guy, we'll see if you can afford your own. The room filled with easy laughter. The kind that stings when you realize you're the punchline. That was the first time I felt it. The quiet distance between us turning into something unbridgeable. So, I started keeping my life to myself. When I graduated, I didn't even invite them to the ceremony. I told them I had work deadlines, and they didn't question it. They never really asked about my work anyway. By 28, I was freelancing full-time, working out of a small studio apartment with creaky floors and paint-stained curtains. My clients were small, coffee shops, boutique stores, a few interior remodels, but they paid enough to keep the lights on. Every few months, Mom would call. Her tone carried that same light pity. "How's the art thing going?" She'd ask, her voice drenched in politeness. "It's going," I'd say. "That's nice. Mara just got promoted again. Isn't that great?" I'd always say yes, even when my stomach tightened. The thing is, I didn't hate them. I just hated the version of me they decided was permanent. They never saw the nights I stayed up sketching until sunrise, or the times I quietly reinvested every cent into upgrading my software, my tools, my skills. They didn't see the weeks I ate canned soup to pay for new equipment, or the months I built a client list from scratch. To them, I was still the one with the silly dream. Then came last year. The shift a real estate developer, a client I'd met through a referral, asked me to redesign the interior of a new boutique hotel. It was small scale at first, but my mock-ups impressed the board. One meeting turned into 3. One contract turned into 2. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to enjoy it without explaining myself. Every milestone I celebrated quietly. When I bought my first office chair, not secondhand for once, I cried in the delivery hallway. When my designs got featured in a local magazine, I laughed alone, sitting on my studio floor with takeout noodles. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about finally believing I was enough. But last month, that illusion, that peace, shattered. It started with a text from Mom. "Family dinner this Sunday." Mara has big news, I almost ignored it. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe habit, made me say yes. That dinner turned into the scene I'll never forget, the laughter. The $10,000 gift. And the reminder that no matter how far I'd come, they still saw me as the girl with sketches instead of plans. But this time, something was different. I wasn't the same Clara they used to belittle. When I walked out of that dinner, I wasn't just hurt. I was done. That night, sitting in my car outside their house, I promised myself something. Not revenge. Not validation. Just this. That I'd never again let their disbelief define my worth. And if life ever gave me the chance to stand on my own ground, literally, I'd take it. Little did I know, that chance was already on its way. After that dinner, something in me clicked, quietly, like a lock turning from the inside. It wasn't anger, not really. It was resolve. For years I had let their words bruise me. This time, I turned that sting into focus. The next morning, I woke before dawn, brewed a pot of cheap coffee, and opened my laptop. My studio, Wind Designs, needed more than late nights and determination. It needed structure, strategy, presence. I made a list, create a proper brand portfolio, build a client referral system, reach out to commercial developers, the kind of things I'd avoided because I didn't feel big enough. That week, I started working out of a shared co-working space downtown. Glass walls, exposed beams, the low hum of other people chasing their own dreams. It was intimidating at first. Everyone around me seemed more polished, more confident. But slowly I settled in. One afternoon, while sketching a lobby concept, a man at the next desk leaned over. "Those are yours?" he asked, pointing to my tablet. "Yeah," I said, hesitating. He introduced himself as Miles Grant, a marketing consultant who worked with real estate brands. He looked at my sketches for a long moment before saying, "You've got a clean aesthetic. Developers love this kind of minimal functional design. That single conversation changed everything. Miles became my first real collaborator, not a mentor, not a savior, just someone who saw my work and took it seriously. He introduced me to contacts who needed designers. Small projects at first, model homes, office lobbies, boutique shops. But each one added weight to my portfolio, credibility to my name. Within 6 months, I was earning more than I'd ever made before. Still not enough to brag about, but enough to breathe without counting grocery receipts. But with growth came exhaustion. There were nights when I'd fall asleep at my desk, the blue glow of my screen spilling across scattered sketches. Days when my inbox overflowed with revisions, deadlines, client emergencies. Still, I didn't complain. No one else would understand why I chose this path anyway. Mom called sometimes, mostly to talk about Mara. Mara's house looks stunning, she'd gush one evening. They just redid the kitchen. You'd love it, and all modern and bright, I smiled faintly. Who designed it? Oh, some firm from downtown. I can't remember the name. When she said it, Renbrook Interiors. My breath caught. I knew that firm. I'd just signed a subcontracting agreement with them. For the next few weeks, I kept my head down, working quietly behind the scenes. My task was small: design consultation for a residential property on Lakeview Avenue. The homeowner wanted neutral tones, open layouts, something airy. The client's name was on the file, Mara Whitfield. I stared at it for a full minute. My sister, of course. For a second, I considered refusing the project. It felt personal, messy, but something inside me, calm and strangely certain, told me to stay. When I visited the property for the first time, the house was still half under renovation. Sunlight filtered through unfinished windows. Sawdust covered the floor. I was there early, reviewing layout plans when I heard footsteps behind me. Clara? Mara's voice. Soft, disbelieving. She looked the same, polished, graceful, a ring catching the light as she tucked her hair behind her ear. What are you doing here? She asked, glancing at the blueprints in my hands. Working, I said simply. Renbrook contracted me for design support. Her expression flickered, a mix of confusion and discomfort. Oh, I didn't realize you worked with them. I do. For a moment, silence stretched between us. The kind heavy enough to hold years of things unsaid. She smiled too quickly. Well, that's nice. Maybe it'll be fun to work together, I nodded. Sure, but we both knew what she meant. Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly on her home. Every fixture, every color palette, every material was a negotiation. Not just of design, but of old wounds. Mara had opinions about everything. I think the dining area should feel more open, she'd say, pointing at a space that didn't need changing. Or, I saw something like this on Pinterest. Can you copy it? I kept my voice steady. I can make something better. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about reminding myself that I belonged there. One afternoon, during a site visit, I overheard her on the phone, talking to Mom. Yeah, Clara's helping, she said, lowering her voice. I think it's some side gig. She seems okay. At least she's keeping busy. That familiar ache rose in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Later that week, Miles dropped by the site. He took one look at my updated layout and whistled. You've outdone yourself, he said. I'm pitching your name directly to Renbrook's partners next week. They're opening a commercial wing and they need lead designers. I blinked. You're serious? As a heart attack. You're ready for it. That night, I sat in my car outside the house I'd just designed. The house my sister would move into, funded partly by our parents' $10,000. For the first time in years, I didn't feel bitter. Just peaceful. Because I'd built something bigger, not in square footage, but in foundation. Still, part of me wondered what my parents would say if they knew. Would they still call it a hobby? Would they still laugh? I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 weeks later, I got an unexpected call from Renbrook's senior partner. They wanted me, not as a subcontractor, but as lead designer on a new commercial project. A luxury apartment complex in North Hills. The client? A group that included one of my father's old business acquaintances. My name would be on the design license. My work, the centerpiece. The next time my parents called, their tone was softer. Curious even. Your sister says you're helping with her house, Mom said. That's interesting. How's that going? It's finished, I said. She moves in next week. That's nice, she replied, hesitating. And your work? Still keeping you busy? Yes, I said, smiling into the phone. More than ever. When I hung up, I realized something. They were starting to hear it, the shift in my voice. The confidence they didn't understand. They didn't know it yet. But soon my name would come up in their world, in boardrooms, in business circles, in the very conversations where they used to mock me, and when it did, I wouldn't need to say a single word. 3 months later, my life looked nothing like it used to. Every morning, I walked into Renbrook's new downtown office, not as an assistant, not as a freelancer, but as lead designer. My name was on the project boards, my concepts framed on the walls. The North Hills luxury project had become our firm's headline. Miles had been right. It was the opportunity that changed everything. The first client meeting took place in a grand conference room filled with people in tailored suits and polished shoes. I still remember the scent of cedar and coffee that morning. Sharp, focused, electric. Halfway through the introductions, the project manager said, "Our lead interior designer, Ms. Clara Morgan, will walk us through the concept visuals." I stood, heart thudding, and faced the group. And then I saw him, my father, sitting across the table. It took me a moment to process it. His firm's name was on the investment file, a silent partner in the development group. His eyes widened, confusion flickering into disbelief. He whispered something to the man beside him. The man nodded toward me, and there it was, recognition. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then I smiled, the same calm, professional smile I'd practiced for years. "Good morning," I said. "Let's begin." I walked them through the presentation, color palettes, lighting flow, spatial transitions, every detail crisp and deliberate. I spoke the language they respected, numbers, design logic, market value. When I finished, the room erupted in quiet approval. "This is impressive," one investor said. "Elegant but commercial. Modern but livable," another nodded. "It feels premium, exactly what we're targeting." And through it all, my father just sat there, silent. After the meeting ended, he approached me in the hallway. "Clara," his voice was softer than I'd heard in years. "I had no idea you were doing real work." I said, still calm. He blinked. "That's not what I meant." "Maybe it is," I replied, gathering my files. "But it's fine. I like surprises." He opened his mouth to say more, but the elevator doors closed between us. That evening, my phone buzzed nonstop. First from Mom, then Mara. Mom's message, "Your father said he saw you today. At some meeting, he's quite impressed." "We're proud of you, honey." I stared at the screen, half smiling, proud. That word had always been rationed carefully in our family, given to Mara like a family heirloom. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I closed my laptop, stepped out onto my small balcony, and looked out at the skyline. That view used to feel like something I was chasing. Now it felt like mine. A week later, Renbrook hosted a project gala, a formal event to showcase designs for investors and clients. It wasn't my kind of scene, but I went. Miles insisted. "You need to be seen," he said. "Success doesn't speak unless you let it." The event took place at the Riverside Grand, the same hotel where, years ago, my parents had celebrated Mara's engagement. I remembered that night vividly. The glittering chandeliers, the laughter that never seemed to include me. Now walking through the same doors, everything felt different, People shook my hand, complimented my work, asked for business cards, and then, near the buffet, I saw them. Mom, Dad, Mara, all three standing together. And this time, they were the ones watching me. Mom approached first. Clara, sweetheart, you look incredible. This event is amazing. I smiled politely. Thank you. I didn't expect to see you here. Mara's husband's firm is part of the investor group, Mom said quickly. Small world, right? Small world indeed. Mara looked uneasy. I didn't realize you were working with Renbrook, she said. I glanced around the room. Well, I'm leading their North Hills project. It's been a good year. Dad joined us, clearing his throat. Your presentation last week was impressive. I didn't know you had built something like this. I didn't either, I said softly, until no one expected me to. The silence that followed was almost beautiful. Mom smiled too brightly. We always knew you were talented. No, I said, shaking my head gently. You knew I was stubborn. The talent came after I stopped trying to prove it to you. Mara shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. I could have pressed further. Could have said everything I'd once rehearsed in my head. Every comeback, every wound turned to weapon. But I didn't need to. My success was the conversation now. My silence, the punctuation. A few minutes later, the event host took the stage. And now, he said into the microphone, we'd like to recognize the lead creative force behind our flagship project, the designer whose vision is redefining modern luxury, Ms. Clara Wynne. Applause filled the room. I walked up, heart steady as flashes went off from photographers. For a second, I caught a glimpse of my family, standing at the back, watching. Mom's smile was trembling. Dad's eyes glistened with something I'd never seen before. Regret. Mara's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but didn't. I accepted the award, thanked the team, and stepped off stage. As I passed my parents, I stopped briefly. Thank you, I said. For what? Dad asked quietly. For underestimating me. It made all this possible. Then I walked away. That night, I got one last message from Mara. I didn't realize how hard you've been working. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel less. Your designs are beautiful, Clara, truly. I read it twice. Unsure how to feel. Forgiveness didn't come easily, not after years of dismissal, but for the first time. It didn't feel impossible. I simply typed back, thanks. Mara, I'm glad you like the house, she replied with a single emoji, a heart. Later, as I turned off the lights in my apartment, I thought about that dinner, the one where it all began. The laughter, the $10,000 envelope, the words, you'll never make it. Now my designs filled spaces their money could only buy. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I just kept building until success spoke in the quiet tone of inevitability. A month passed after the gala. The project wrapped successfully. The investors signed off, and my inbox filled with new offers, each one bigger than the last. But more than that, I felt light, not triumphant, not proud, just steady, the kind of peace that comes when you stop living to prove anything. I moved into a small craftsman-style home near Lake Union. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, every inch designed by my own hands. The morning light hit the glass panels just right, scattering warmth across the kitchen floor. Sometimes I'd stand there barefoot with a cup of coffee, remembering that dinner table. The clinking of forks, the laughter, the feeling of shrinking in a room full of people who claimed to love me but never saw me. Now I smiled at the memory, not bitterly, but with quiet amusement. They hadn't been villains, just blind, and I had finally stopped asking them to see. A few weeks later, I got a message from Mom. We're thinking of visiting. Would you mind if we stopped by? I stared at the text for a while. Old habits kicked in, the reflex to say yes, to please, to make it easy. Then I typed, "Sure, Sunday at noon." The day came bright and clear. The air smelled like spring rain and blooming lavender from the garden. When their car pulled into the driveway, I watched from the window. Calm, steady. Mom stepped out first, holding a pie. Dad followed, slower, older somehow. Mara came too, her toddler perched on her hip. I opened the door before they knocked. Mom's eyes widened as she looked around. "Clara, this place is beautiful." I smiled softly. "Thank you. I designed it." Dad whistled low, scanning the open concept space, the vaulted ceilings, the natural light spilling across the room. "You really did this yourself?" "Yes," I said. Every detail. They wandered through in silence, taking in the textures, the soft color palette, the framed art prints that told my story without words. When they reached the back patio, Mom paused, emotion catching in her throat. "You've done so well, sweetheart." There was no hesitation in her tone this time. No hidden edge. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I hadn't before. Humility. Maybe even pride. Dad cleared his throat. "We might not have said it enough, but we're proud of you, Clara. You've built a good life." I nodded, a quiet acceptance settling over me. "Thank you." That means a lot, and it did. But it didn't define me anymore. After lunch, as they packed up to leave, Mara lingered by the door. "She's right, you know," she said softly. "You've built something beautiful. I wish I'd believed in you sooner," I smiled. "It's okay. Sometimes people have to see the house before they believe it exists," she laughed gently. "You always were poetic." "Occupational hazard," I said. Before she left, she placed a small envelope on the counter. "It's not money," she said quickly. "Just something I wanted to give you." After they drove off, I opened it. Inside was a photo. Us as kids, sitting in the backyard on a summer evening, faces sticky with popsicle juice. On the back, she'd written, "I miss this version of us. Maybe we can find her again." I sat down, holding the photo for a long time. Maybe forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Maybe it meant understanding that people could change, even if it took years and distance and silence to do it. That night, as the city lights shimmered across the lake, I stepped outside. The air was cool, soft against my skin. I thought about all the versions of myself that had existed before this one. The girl who'd stayed quiet. The woman who'd worked through nights. The dreamer they'd laughed at. Every version had built this moment. Brick by invisible brick. My success hadn't been a weapon. It had been a home. A safe one. Mine. A few weeks later, I hosted a small dinner at my house. Not for family, but for my team. Miles, our interns, the assistant who reminded me of myself at 24. As they laughed and passed dishes across the table, I caught myself smiling. The warmth in that room was different. Earned, chosen, safe. At one point, Miles raised his glass. To Clara, the calmest storm I've ever met. Everyone laughed. I did too. But later, as I washed dishes in the quiet kitchen, that phrase echoed in my mind. The calmest storm. Maybe that's what I'd become. Steady enough to build, strong enough to stay standing when others doubted. A few days later, my phone buzzed again. A notification from the real estate app I'd been using months ago. New listing available. Reed Lake Estates. I clicked it absent-mindedly and froze. The property? The very development I'd designed. The model home, the crown jewel of the project. Under the description was one small line, designed by Clara Wynn Interiors. For a moment, I just stared. Then quietly I whispered to myself, "You did it." Not in disbelief. Not in pride, just acknowledgement. Later that night, I got one last text from Dad. "Your mom and I saw your name on the listing. We sent it to everyone we know. The house looks perfect. You should be proud." I didn't reply, not because I was angry at us, but because I didn't need to. Sometimes silence is the loudest thank you. When I finally went to bed, I left my window open. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, calm and endless. For years, they'd told me I couldn't build something lasting. They were right. I couldn't build it for them. I built it for me, and that made all the difference.